So, Philadelphia pulling off something bold going into 2025. That's the subject matter of today's show. And let's begin with this foundation here. Of course, heading into 2025, the Eagles are the defending Super Bowl champions because last year they pulled off one of the most impressive Super Bowl championships of all time, denying the Chiefs their quest of a three-peat and annihilating, dominating Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid. Jalen Hurts reveling in the moment inside the Superdome in New Orleans in February, becoming Super Bowl MVP, and bringing the Eagles their second Lombardi trophy in franchise history. Isn't this a beautiful sight? This was on the eve of the Eagles' second championship parade. Me doing a show right outside of the link. Producer Chip and his girlfriend Allie filming the program. What's in the background right behind me? Not just one Lombardi trophy. We zoom in to this photo right here. That is two Lombardi trophies. What this organization has been able to do really since the turn of the century in 2000 has been impressive. Eagles are one of the top organizations in the game over the last 25 years, and you can make the argument that over the last few, Philadelphia, Kansas City. 1, 2, you can flip that order, but 1, 2 as being the two best and most successful organizations and franchises in the National Football League. But here's the thing. When you win a Super Bowl, or you come close to winning a Super Bowl, oftentimes the front office, the owner, the coaching staff, the roster, there's a lot of pressure on the team to run it back. You look at the most recent example with the San Francisco 49ers. They lost the Super Bowl, Super Bowl 58, to the Chiefs in Las Vegas in overtime in crushing, gutting fashion. They tasted a Super Bowl victory. Would have been their first since 1994. Would have been their sixth as an organization. But they come up short. They felt the pressure, though, of trying to capitalize on that Super Bowl window. They ran it back. And the Niners spent $330 million plus in cash last year going into 2024 and during 2024 after losing the Super Bowl only to go 6-11. And so on one end, you look at that team that either won a championship or made it to the Super Bowl. They made it far. They'll always be remembered by the fan base, by the sport, the history of it. They played or won a title. Why not try to run it back and repeat as Super Bowl champions? Obviously, for the Eagles, they won it last year. Why not try to repeat with the same collection of players heading into 2025? That's one way to look at it, right? On the other end, you run the risk, if you do run it back and don't make a lot of changes, of that roster getting stale. That roster can become old very quickly. That roster simply can just turn into being a team that's not good enough, or they wear down. What the Eagles have done roster-wise as an organization after their Super Bowl runs, there's been a consistent pattern. Up until what Howie Roseman, Jeffrey Lurie, Nick Sirianni, and the Eagles have done off the heels of last year's championship going into this year. But you turn the clocks back to Super Bowl 39 during the 2004 season. The Eagles lost to the New England Patriots 24-21. Tom Brady, Bill Belichick, Teddy Bruschi, some headliners on that team, obviously. Philadelphia was so close to winning that game. They had lost 3 consecutive NFC Championship games before finally winning their 4th straight NFC Championship game, or at least their 4th straight appearance. And they beat the Falcons. They play the Patriots in the Super Bowl. They lose in heartbreaking fashion, 24-21. They should have won that game. They were the better team. And so what did the Eagles do? Coming so close to capturing their first Lombardi trophy in franchise history. They ran it back. In 2004, the Eagles went 13-3. Number 1 seed in the NFC. Home field advantage going through Lincoln Financial Field in the infancy stages of that stadium being in existence in South Philadelphia. But they went 13-3. They lost in the Super Bowl. They run it back for the most part, bringing pretty much that same roster back in 2005. Injuries left and right. Donovan McNabb didn't play well. There was the Terrell Owens saga. He barely played for the Eagles. Then the Eagles suspended him We never saw him again. Went to the Dallas Cowboys after 2005. We got one full season of T.O. in an Eagles uniform. But that year in 2005, when the Eagles ran it back, they went 6-10, 0-6 in the NFC East. The first team ever to go 6-0 in their division the prior year, only to go winless the following year. And Joe Banner and Andy Reid, general manager, head coach combination, you can see where they were coming from with that strategy, right? Made it to 4 straight NFC championship games. We're desperate to win a championship. We were so close. Let's run it back with the hopes that we can get over the hump. In Super Bowl 52, during the 2017 season, the Eagles got their revenge on Tom Brady and Bill Belichick and the New England Patriots, and they won one of the most entertaining Super Bowls of all time. Back and forth all game, came down to the final play, that Tom Brady Hail Mary. Eagles catch the dub, and they bring home their first title with the 41-33 victory. In 2017, the Eagles, number 1 seed in the NFC. Home field advantage going through the link. Place was rocking with Nick Foles as the quarterback stepping in for Carson Wentz. Philadelphia went 13-3 that year, despite losing their starting quarterback in week 11, maybe a little bit later, and they won the Super Bowl. 2018. Remember that 2018 Eagles team? They were a little bit older. And Philadelphia maintained its core from that prior year, but even though they went 9-7, they made it to the playoffs, and they made it to the divisional round. Remember what had to happen just for the Eagles to get into the playoffs that year? They went 4-0 in their final 4 games as Nick Foles, once again, replaced an injured Carson Wentz, and they go into that divisional round game against New Orleans as a team that could have won. I thought they were going to win. Then the ball goes through Alshon Jeffrey's hands, picked off, game over, Eagles season over. But from 13-3 to 9-7, that roster got old, stale, very, very quickly. Why? Because Howie Roseman, Doug Peterson, and the Eagles pretty much had that same strategy of running it back. We won it the year prior. Let's try to repeat. Let's keep this dynasty going. I remember being by the Art Museum steps for that Super Bowl parade. Doug Peterson saying, we got this one Super Bowl. We want this to be the start. It really wasn't the start, because the Eagles, after that Super Bowl championship season under Dougie P, slow starting teams, sluggish teams, and in his final year in 2020, an outright bad team. Then the Eagles make it to Super Bowl 57 during the 2022 season. Eagles lose to Kansas City in one of the most heartbreaking Philadelphia sports defeats that I can ever remember. 38-35. They should have won that game as well. In 2022, the Eagles offense took the league by storm. The defense was very opportunistic. They went 14-3, number 1 seed in the NFC. Home field advantage going through Lincoln Financial Field. The following year, the Eagles went 11-6, not a bad record at all anytime you're able to win double-digit games. But what happened? There was the collapse. It got very ugly toward the end of the year as the Eagles lost 6 of 7 games. Again, that similar theme. The Eagles pretty much ran it back under Nick Sirianni and Howie Roseman. For instance, they felt the pressure coming so close to winning a Super Bowl to bring players like James Bradbury back on a big money contract. He got cooked overnight. Is gonna look a lot different. Will it work out? We'll see. But as always, Howie Roseman ain't scared, and he's very confident in his team building strategy. Key players lost this offseason. Look at this list. Milton Williams, Josh Sweat, Mekhi Becton, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, Isaiah Rodgers, Brandon Graham, traded away Kenny Pickett, lost Oren Burks, Kenneth Gainwell, Avonte Maddox, and then some lesser-known players, Fred Johnson, Paris Campbell, LaRaven Clark, Rick Lovato, CJ Uzama, Jack Driscoll, Nick Gates, Britton Covey, and Ian Book. The key players added this offseason for the Eagles. By way of free agency and trades, Kenyon Green, Azeez Ojulari, Josh Uche, Adoree Jackson, Kylan Granson, Kendall Lamb, Charlie Hewlett, Matt Pryor, A.J. Dillon. The draft class, Jahad Campbell, Andrew Makuba, Ty Robinson, Mac McWilliams, Smile Mondon, Drew Kendall, Kyle McCord, Myles Hinton, Cameron Williams, and Antoine Powell-Ryland. The Eagles' positional spending on each unit. As always, Howie Roseman, very smart and savvy here. Their entire offense, 12th in the NFL as far as dollars devoted to that unit. And on defense, the 30th ranked unit as far as positional spending. And that can end up being a bargain for the Eagles. And really, that takes center focus of today's show. Because a strategy that we have seen this year for the Eagles, they didn't want to run it back for the sake of running it back. Did they look at players on the roster who were very important contributors to a team that won the Super Bowl last year? Yeah, of course. And the Eagles are very thankful for the contributions from those players. But those were players who could cash in and get bags. And so the Eagles said, fine, go and get your money. We don't need to overpay for the sake of running it back to retain these players that are getting so much more money than what we're willing to pay them. There were other older players on the roster, like a Brandon Graham. I know he retired, but the Eagles, I think, could have convinced him to come back. Instead, they said, you've won 2 Super Bowls. You're a team captain, one of the best Eagles of all time. What better way to end your 15-year career than walking into the sunset with the 2nd Lombardi trophy? And so with some of these older players, the Eagles either decided we don't need to retain them. For Brandon Graham, go ahead and retire. And instead, the Eagles said, we don't want to be an old team like we have been with some of these prior teams that have made it to Super Bowls. Let's instead go younger here. It's a different plan from what the Eagles have done in the past. Philadelphia here, ladies and gentlemen, is investing and banking on their youth and young players developing and taking strides as NFL players. Sometimes, this is why it can be risky, players don't make the necessary leap, like a jalen and a Nolan Smith. We're hoping that they do, but it's not a guarantee, is my point there. Sometimes players don't step up to fulfill roles, like Keely Ringo stepping in for Darius Slay. Another example there. There is risk in relying on all of that, but the Eagles as an organization believe in their infrastructure. They believe in their stable environment, great culture, and development of players and coaches. And I think what the odds makers also say about the Eagles going into 2025 is pretty notable too. Philadelphia is favored in 15 of 17 games, despite this being a very difficult schedule. Now the Eagles are going to need to be sharper with execution. They're going to need to stay motivated. They're going to have to adapt and evolve and, of course, stay healthy. Those are all very important elements of Philadelphia being able to repeat. But staying healthy, staying motivated, adapting and evolving, being sharper with execution. Sometimes that is aided by having younger players who have more youthful energy, who are eager to prove themselves, who are looking to get contracts, make names for themselves in the NFL. And when you have a veteran
The Philadelphia Eagles aren't waiting for training camp. From under-the-radar signings to quietly impactful contract moves, Howie Roseman is seemingly building insulation around Hurts, Sirianni, and a locker room that still remembers February heartbreak. Let's start the offensive line edition. Cam Jurgens is locked in and Lane Johnson is still elite. On the other hand, Jordan Mailata is quietly playing one of the nastiest anchors in football. The Eagles didn't just retain talent, but reinforced rhythm. Continuity up front isn't nice, but it's everything, especially for a quarterback like Jalen Hurts, who thrives in rhythm and collapses in messy situations. The national conversation obsesses over wideouts and running backs, but Philadelphia knows the engine is the line. That's why Jurgens' extension matters more than any flashy signing. The Eagles are betting on infrastructure, and infrastructure wins when the cold months roll in. Now, skill weapons. On paper, this trio, A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, and Saquon Barkley, look radioactive. ESPN's metrics rank them among the most complete offensive groups in football, but depth matters, and that's where Roseman's chessboard shines. Danny Gray wasn't supposed to matter, but in actuality, he does now. Reports say he's flashing versatility in short routes like sideline footwork and deep seam threats. There's no complacency here. Even with top-tier skill starters, the Eagles are testing, rotating, and layering. They know injuries don't knock, but barge in, and when they do, plug and play Depth needs to be real, not projected. Flip the field, and the defense isn't coasting either. Joshua Uche and Azeez Ojulari, these two names that might not rock your fantasy league, but they do rock the defensive edges. What Philly lacked late last season was consistent pressure opposite the interior push. They now have rotational heat. They're not asking Uche to be Micah Parsons. Instead, they're asking him to win one-on-ones and make life miserable for tackles. The same goes for Ojulari, and when you already have Davis and Carter pushing the pocket, that outside threat could be a multiplier. Now, let's talk money. Incentive-laced one-year deals with minimal dead cap. Roseman doesn't commit unless the math and the tape both agree. He's built a system where talent comes hungry and leaves productive. It's what made their Super Bowl run possible last time, and it's what makes them dangerous again. It also gives them flexibility. You can think of it as roster liquidity. When you avoid bloated guarantees, you get to pivot faster mid-season. The options remain live because the cap remains breathable. And now, the quarterback that ties it all together. Jalen Hurts isn't learning a new system, but refining muscle memory, and that's rare. Most franchises churn playbooks, while Philly runs it back with essential upgrades. Sirianni remains the emotional through line, and Hurts remains the tactical leader. That synergy matters more than casual fans grasp. When QB and HC share a language, camp is an upload. Here, every adjustment sticks and every rep sharpens. That's why Philly doesn't need to overhaul. Still, this team isn't flawless. The secondary still lacks long-range durability. If injuries hit, safety depth thins fast. Nakobe Dean's health also lingers, and linebacker rotations aren't solid yet. Moreover, a slot WR or situational nickel CB might still arrive via late trade. However, the structure is built to absorb turbulence. There's no reliance on one rookie, nor is there any gamble on one scheme change. When adversity hits, this team is expected to adjust internally. Forget the fireworks and keep an eye on the scaffolding. This offseason, Philly is installing steel beams under a roster that already knows how far it can go. Every Roseman move has context, and each deal has an exit ramp. Remember, in Philly, the season doesn't start in September, but in the silence before camp. Stay tuned and hit subscribe if you haven't already.